I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Reina Abraham. Reina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here,
Okay.
Dr. Neri.
Welcome, and the time is all yours.
Thank
10
you.
minutes. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to put in the slide. Okay. So good day, colleagues. It's a pleasure to share our work with you today. The title of my presentation is, as you can see on the screen, it's Getting from How Am I Doing to How Do I Get to Where I Plan to Go, How Students Process and Act on Feedback. So I'm Dr. Abraham, and my co-researcher is Dr. Veena Singaram. I coordinate the clinical skills program at the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So to start off with some background, feedback is very important to the progress of learners, as we all know. Feedback improves students' performance. Learners identify feedback as one of the most important qualities of a preceptor, and learners demand more feedback from preceptors, which unfortunately they do not get enough. So Jack Anday, who wrote a seminal article on feedback in 1983, said that without feedback, mistakes go uncorrected, good performances is not reinforced, and clinical competence or performance is achieved empirically, if not at all. Feedback is rocket science. It's not an easy task to necessarily do. It is rocket science because as we're trying to get a learner from the ground up to becoming a competent physician or a competent clinician, they often need corrective action. So the concept of feedback originated from rocket engineering in 1940s. The concept is that ongoing information is needed for a system to make adjustments in order to achieve a goal. If a rocket goes from the ground to the sky, it makes small adjustments left and right, up and down, forward and backwards in order to go up straight or to go up to where the destination is. The term feedback was applied by the humanities by Robert Weiner in 1950. And as you can see, when we adjust the feedback or the adjustments that we give learners in feedback during the course of the human trajectory, and the behavior change that occurs is then called learning. So what do we know of feedback so far? We know from the literature that students seek feedback, and we know that they do this during their clerkships or their rotations. The literature also contains recommendations to supervisors on how to give feedback. These include the feedback sandwich and the Pendleton's ask, tell, ask model, which I will not go into detail here. What still needs to be discovered for us is how students process the feedback they receive, what they do with the feedback, and how they follow up. And we think that the insight and the discovery from this process will be helpful for training clinical supervisors to navigate the feedback process much more effectively. So a summary of our work. So our study involved using focus group data. The setting, we conducted the study at the Clinical Skills Laboratory at the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine. The subjects consisted of preclinical medical students during the end of their third year rotation. We collected data using focus group discussions. We de-identified the data before we analyzed. For data analysis, we employed classical qualitative methodology using iterative analysis process, identifying emerging themes. And my co-researcher and I arrived at consensus if and when we encountered any disappointments. So now to share our results. So we conducted a total of 4 focus groups with 25 third-year medical students. So what we found is that students identified 4 distinct steps after they received feedback. The first is that they would assess the quality of the feedback. The second is that they would gauge the alignment of the feedback to their self-perceptions and their future goals. The third is that they would then decide to accept and implement the feedback or reject and ignore the feedback based on whether the feedback is of good quality and whether the feedback aligns with their goals and self-perceptions. And the last step is that they would like to follow up on the feedback after implementation. So as you can see from this slide, we are highlighting the fact that gauging the alignment of feedback with learners' self-perceptions involved or basing whether they accept or they reject the feedback are based on the two previous steps, as well as follow-up after implementation. So these highlighted parts are the steps that we did not know in full detail before this study. So now what did we learn from this project? We learned that we could use the data we have to guide clinical supervisors to provide feedback more effectively in a learner-centered sort of way. So to illustrate this, we recommend 4 steps when we train supervisors on giving feedback. The first step is to build a relationship with the learner. By doing that, you gain the trust of the learner so that the feedback becomes accepted more readily. The second step is to assess the learner's goals with the themes or their rotations as well as their career so that we could think how we could align the feedback we give the learner in terms of feedback with their goals. The third is to observe their performance and provide quality feedback which aligns with their individual goals. And the last step is to allow and build time for implementation of feedback and schedule follow-up for the learner just to close the feedback loop. Similar to the previous slide that I mentioned, I've highlighted the areas that we think is missing from the literature. We oftentimes don't try to build relationship with our learners. The second thing is we usually don't assess the learners' goals for their rotations or their themes or even their future career before we provide feedback. And then the third is while we provide feedback, we often are not mindful to ensure the feedback aligns with individual goals. And lastly, we often do not allow time for implementation of feedback and schedule follow-up with the learners. So in conclusion, feedback should be learner-centered and viewed as an opportunity to partner with the learners to achieve a goal. Thank you very much once again for allowing me this opportunity to share my work with you virtually, and please do not hesitate to contact me on my email there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reina, for that presentation. Also very interesting in that we're all grappling with different ways of giving our students quality feedback. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Reina? If you would mind putting it in the chat, if you will. All right. Reina, there is a question here from Christiane from Forden, I think is the pronunciation. It says, thank you, Reina. What is the current model for becoming a supervisor?
So I just attended a session today on the workshop on a supervisor. So I'm actually a new.
Perfect.
It's not something that I'm so good at. But there are of course a lot of learnings in terms of what should be the role and responsibility of a supervisor. So one of them definitely is guidance and providing the right advice to your student, as well as providing them with constructive and honest feedback. So the fact that students, you need to be able to, of course, being learner-centered, knowing the personality of your student, where to start with regards to giving feedback is very important. So feedback in terms of ensuring that students have the right attitude to take constructive feedback is another thing. So we actually moving away from delivering feedback, that's what the curriculum, the whole literature is talking about. How do you deliver feedback? All supervisors delivering feedback. We need to move away from delivering feedback to how we get students to start eliciting feedback now and basically seeking feedback the right way. So the role of feedback comes a whole long way with regards to supervision. So I think that's one thing I can add to this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There is a question from Dr. Karen Beck. Welcome, Karen, who's our Deputy Dean, who's just come out of the same meeting that I had to run out of. And the question or the comment here is, feedback is an essential part of learning. What are some of the ways through which we could facilitate the appropriate interpretation of feedback by students?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really nice question, actually, and it's basically, I think some of the I highlighted a few of those factors in my presentation in terms of developing that good relationship, and of course, when you get the students to be able to receive feedback rightly, they are most likely going to use it and interpret it the right way. So, as one of my when I did my study, one of the things was I developed feedback scoring tool, which was basically help supervisors who are giving feedback to be able to give more constructive feedback based on the deliberate practice framework, which had those components, which is be able to describe the task, being able to describe the performance gap, as well as providing, ensuring that you suggested action plans are provided. So when you give those kind of feedback that's based on the learning objectives, so with regards to the outcomes of a particular skill, it makes it much more easier for students to be able to interpret the feedback. The other thing is by encouraging and enlightening peer feedback. So we have this particular skill that's going on in our clinical skills laboratory, where we get students to actually assess each other and provide feedback just the way that the doctors or the clinicians do. So getting them to do that basically gets them more feedback literate, and they're able to be able to assess and interpret feedback well. A third thing that I also introduced was the post-evaluation feedback tool, where the students actually have to scaffold the feedback that are being provided by the tutors, so that they're able to identify what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses in their performances, and being able to develop a performance goals. They're supposed to show that they actually list down some of these performance goals. So getting them to scaffold feedback itself it's some kind of a coaching mechanism to facilitate feedback interpretation in students. So, and of course, I cannot, say the fact that you need to develop some kind of a formative assessment feedback culture in the system. It's absolutely key, because the students know that they're going to receive feedback. It's going to be dialogic. We're going to be talking between your doctor, your clinician, and yourself. And you're going to, of course, get the students to be able to self-assess themselves before feedback is given. It again stimulates interpretation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Reina. And there's
Thank
also
you.
support for dialogic feedback from Veronica Mitchell, as well as Nolene, our previous presenter as well. There is a question here. I think it's an important one. Can response to feedback be used as a way of grading students? Also
Absolutely.
from Pritchard.
Absolutely. Very good
Yeah.
question. Absolutely. In fact, we are looking at that possibility. It's called the programmatic assessment, and where we have basically going to be able to repeatedly, assess students as part of having these formative assessments over, some part of a longitudinal clerkship over the years. And, so each of those assessments and the feedback that you give the students can be analyzed and can be used, towards their summative assessments. So that's another thing. So when you share these feedback intermittently with the students, it gives them adequate time to be able to implement it and, learn from it and do so much more better and develop within that scope of time. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there could be many more questions around that, especially like identifying the quality of feedback. So can
Yes.
I ask you a very quick last question, taking advantage of my seat? Are you able to identify a tool that we could
Yes.
measure good quality feedback? And if
Yes,
you
we
would
did.
mind sharing that, please, with us.
Yes, I did actually develop what we call as a feedback scoring tool based, like I did say, based on the deliberate practice
Okay.
framework, which is able to assess the presence of, three components of deliberate practice, which is the task, the performance gap, as well as an action plan being provided. So, and each of those components was scored between 0 to 3. In terms of did it contain that particular aspect of the component? Was it just a vague description? Was it a good description, or was it a very specific description of that particular component? So tutors are able to use that scoring tool to be able to grade and assess the quality of the feedback, and the same tool can also be given to the students when they are also providing feedback to their peers. And so they assess the quality based on that, and they basically develop their feedback giving skills as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and well done. You've also got
Thank
good
you.
support from your co-author Veena Singaram.
Oh, thank you so
Who's,
much, Veena. Thanks a lot.
But all the best with your
Okay,
ongoing studies on this, and we look forward to hearing from you again at
sure.
the next conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Neri. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.